Hello, my name is Otto Scharmer. I am a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management and the co-founder of the Cambridge-based Presencing Institute. I'm sorry that I cannot join you in person at the Sustainability Conference next week in Budapest, but due to a prior commitment, that's not possible for me, and the organizers asked me to maybe participate at least virtually in your gathering next week by a little remark via video or something. So sitting here in my home office in Massachusetts, so let me maybe think about a moment about that and share a reflection with you. So what comes to my mind is the situation that we share, that you all share, that brings you together in Hungary, in Budapest, and that brings together many other people in many other places. Not only the Occupy movement, but many other people in many other places. And I think it is an expression of basically a feeling of uneasiness, that we feel that something is heading in a direction on a macro level that is not right, that in fact kind of something is ending and dying and something else is wanting to be born. And the aspect that's ending has to do with an old way of organizing and creating institutions in business and government and civil society, and has to do with the situation that we share today around the world in many larger systems, which is that collectively we create results that nobody wants. Collectively, we create results that nobody wants. And this situation is clearly expressed in three numbers that I briefly want to share with you: 1.5, 2.5, and 3.0. 1.5 signifies the ecological divide. We operate a 1.5 planet footprint economy, but we only live in a 1.0 planet reality. So each year we consume 1.5 times the regenerative capacity of our planet. And that contradiction has led to the destruction of a third of our agricultural land globally in just the last 40 years. So in about a decade, we managed to destroy a third. And together with the rapidly falling water tables, we are heading towards food crisis and a doubling of food prices by 2030, as experts expect today. In other words, to more suffering and riots and social upheaval. The second number, 2.5, refers to the social divide. 2.5 billion people live below the poverty line. And in spite of all the hundreds of millions of people that have been lifted out of poverty over the last decades or so, that number, 2.5, remained stable and did not go down. And the third number, 3.0, refers to our inner divide, to the spiritual divide. And according to WHO, in the year 2000, in spite of all the wars and violent conflicts going on, 3 times as many people kill themselves than are being killed through others. 3 times as many people kill themselves than they kill others. If you put that number into context with rapidly rising figures for burnout and for depression, you see they are all part of the same landscape, and they are all part of the same deeper problem, and that problem has to do with a disconnect between what I'm doing kind of in my work and life on the one hand, and my inner sources of inspiration and presence on the other hand. So these three divides, the ecological divide, the social divide, the spiritual divide, that's kind of the challenge. Those are the outcomes that we collectively create, although no one really wants to see them. And that's kind of what we as a generation of change makers, one way or the other, need to transform. So what have we learned? How have we approached these issues over the 20th century? Well, basically, if you think about it, we created for each of these issues a ministry, sometimes more than one ministry. We created for each of these issues a group of NGOs in civil society. And then we also, in academia, we created for each of these issues a department, conferences and journals, professional career paths. So there is a little industry around each of these three kind of divides. If there's anything that what we have learned over the past over the 20th century or so, it's probably this: that as long as we address these problems one issue at a time, we'll be getting nowhere. We'll remain to be unsuccessful in addressing them, particularly in addressing them at a root level. And the same applies to sustainability. As long as we think about sustainable development as something that only kind of combines the environmental and the social, I don't think we are going to address the real issue. It's already a progress from earlier approaches, but it's not good enough, because we do need to include the third dimension, which is kind of the inner, or the dimension of awareness and consciousness. Or the dimension of the spiritual divide, as I called it earlier. And what inspires me most about the present moment that we share in history, that you share in Budapest and that we share in many other places today around the world, is that we see the arrival of a generation, of Generation Y, and we see the arrival of a consciousness that many of us begin to tap into more fully, in which this understanding that in fact the three divides are not separate things, they are not separate problems. The environment, the social, and kind of the inner divide, they are not separate problems. They are three different sides of one and the same problem, where this kind of intuitive understanding is more and more common sense. It's more and more common sense for people. It's more and more common sense for young people, and also for people from other generations. And what I am trying to do is to develop social technologies that actually help diverse group of stakeholders to address kind of the issues of sustainable development in a way kind of that is inclusive of all these three divides. And that's kind of what we do in the global presencing community. We had a global forum here in Boston a few weeks ago, which, because we had limited space here, was then also extended to 12 parallel sessions around the world, where through live stream, people participated in parts of these events and also created their own local regional content. So all of that happened spontaneously, and I think we live in a moment where we see kind of people really going after opportunities and communities and approaches where all three dimensions that I mentioned are dealt with in an integrative way. And when we look at the deeper issues, so what is it kind of that's actually kind of creating these three divides and creating these three issues? The crisis that we face today globally is, of course, a crisis that is a crisis of kind of that foreshadows the next stage of our evolution as society, where we have come on a journey where kind of in many societies we went through a 1.0 society and economy, state-centric, and we call that mercantilism or socialism or other ways. 2.0, the laissez-faire type of free market economy, high growth but also high on negative externalities, leading to a 3.0 economy, where we have all the three sectors, business, government, and NGOs kind of interacting with each other, where we have this state often is also, or in Europe is referred to as social market economy. In the US it's sometimes called stakeholder capitalism, but basically it is like where different stakeholder groups, including kind of from the NGO groups, kind of influence the legislative process. So it works. So we have seen the rise of the welfare state and so on. It has been working. But what we see today is that this 3.0 economy, kind of with three sectors working against each other and with organizing around special interest groups, this has come to an end. We saw it in the collapse of the climate talks in Copenhagen. We saw it in the successful undermining of the Wall Street financial industry after the crisis 2008, preventing Washington to come up with really useful regulation around the financial industry. So that's where you see that special interest groups really undermine the capacity of the whole, all the other stakeholders to innovate at the scale of the whole system. And what we need today, what we need to do today, and what we need to do in the decade that's ahead of us, which feels like it will be a decade that's marked through profound disruption and also profound opportunities for innovation, that we need to move from a way of organizing around special interests to organizing around common interests, and that we need to develop and that we need to move from working against each others across the three sectors, civil society, government, and business, to working with each other in order to develop the capability to innovate at the scale of the whole system, not just products, not just local innovations. We need to redesign and reinvent at the scale of the whole system. That's really what's necessary today. And for that to happen, we need to bring together all the key stakeholders and support them so that they can move on a journey, that they can shift the inner place from that they operate as an organization, but also as an individual, from something that I call ecosystem awareness, ecosystem, so just kind of taking into account the me and the advantage for me, to ecosystem awareness, where we also take into account what the interests and the well-being of all the others in the system. So that's really what's necessary today. And what we learned at the Presencing Institute and the global presencing community is that this transformation, this shift of the inner place from that we operate, is not possible if it's not supported in the right way, so that we can develop the inner capacities, the inner leadership capacities that are required for this to be successful. And so one way of describing these inner capabilities, these new leadership capabilities, is that they have to do with the tuning of three inner instruments, or three instruments of knowing, which are the open mind, which is basically the capability to suspend habits of thought, the open heart, and with open heart I mean the capacity to look at a problem from the viewpoint of another stakeholder, particularly from the viewpoint of the most marginalized stakeholders. And the open will. And with open will, I mean the capacity to let go and let come. If that's not there, then stakeholder dialogues tend to, turn into an exercise where we are same old, where the same speeches are just reenacted one more time. And for the transformative shift to happen that we need in all sectors of society and the economy today, we need to cultivate, we need to provide and cultivate these inner capacities, these inner leadership capacities of the open mind, open heart, and open will that I just mentioned, because that's the way to the future. And to the degree that we see the opposite, which is the closing of the mind, the closing of the heart, and the closing of the will, what is that? So any social system that depicts these three features, we refer to essentially as fundamentalism. And that's, of course, what we also see in many parts of the world. So there is, the moment that we share in history today plays out in a crisis that is enacted kind of on an exterior theater, you could say. But then there's also an interior dimension of that. And that's the one I just mentioned. And so that's what I do. That's why I try to be in support of. And I'm sure kind of that's what many of you would have said or would connect with just in the same way. I wish you all the best for your conference. And I look forward to join your conversation. And to join your wonderful place in Central Europe that I love and have taken lots of inspiration from. Also beginning prior to the fall, the Berlin Wall coming down, and in the early years after, hopefully in person next year. All the best. Bye.